Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Now TV and Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. I do appreciate so very, very much you being with me. And we are continuing our discussion of the really, really critical question, is there a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of AD 70? Now, a little bit of reminder of a background of what we're doing here. We have been examining the challenge of Christ. The challenge of Christ is found in John chapter 10, 37, where Jesus said, "If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." I've got to tell you, just this morning on Facebook, I was interacting with an atheist who is rejecting Christianity because Jesus failed. So, as I've shared with you many times as we've been in this series, this challenge of Christ is not hypothetical. It is certainly not just a, quote, academic exercise into some arcane, dry subject. This is real life, ladies and gentlemen. This is about whether or not we can trust Jesus. It is about whether or not the Bible is truly inspired. It is about whether or not Christianity itself is built on a solid bedrock of truth, or Jesus was just another false prophet. You know, an author by the name of Josh McDowell, who was very, very prominent several years ago, wrote a book with a subtitle. I've forgotten the name of the book itself. Oh, man, I hate to do that. Anyway, the subtitle was that Jesus was either a liar, a lunatic, or he was Lord. And Josh McDowell's entire argument was, now mind you, Josh McDowell was and is a futurist. Not one time in the book did he address the challenge of Christ that you and I have been studying together now for over 2 years. His entire focus was on the resurrection of Jesus. And of course, he extrapolated from that to say, we're waiting on the resurrection at the end of time. Not once did he address the challenge of Christ in considering, well, wait a minute, Jesus said his coming and the judgment of every man was going to happen in the first century generation. Did it happen? Was he a liar? Was he a lunatic? Or is he Lord? Proven by the fact that he kept his word. And there have been any number of Christian scholars, to use that term, Christian authors, who have set out to defend Christianity, a very, very noble purpose. Okay, I'm not impugning their purpose at all, or their desire. I'm simply saying that extremely few Christian writers ever set out to prove that Jesus kept his word in regard to his coming, the judgment, and the resurrection. They skirt the issue. They ignore the issue. They even deny the issue. But ladies and gentlemen, this challenge will not go away. And like I said, just this morning, as I filmed this, just about 30 minutes before I started filming, I was on Facebook, and there's this atheist on there, an avowed atheist, attacking Christianity because of Jesus's failed promises. So, we began our investigation into the challenge of Christ by examining the apocalyptic nature of language. That is to say, the language of the coming of the Lord on the clouds, in flaming fire, with a shout, with the angels, etc., is metaphoric, figurative, non-literal language. Now, if you have not yet done so, let me remind you and let me encourage you to get a copy of my book, Like Father, Like Son, on Clouds of Glory. I had someone call me up just this week, okay, and tell me that in their estimation, after having read that book 2 or 3 times, this individual, who is himself an author, said, Don, this book needs to be in every seminary in America, every seminary in the world. And I encouraged him to try to get that done. But you need to understand the nature of Hebraic prophetic language as being non-literal. So we have set out to demonstrate and to share with you how this language of the coming of the Lord on the clouds of heaven was never intended to be taken literally, of Jesus coming back at some end of time event, riding on a literal cloud as a 5'5" Jewish man coming out of heaven. Never intended to be taken that way. And so the real question therefore becomes, okay, number one, did Jesus promise to come back in the first century in the judgment of every man? I have documented that he did repeatedly and with multitudes of evidence. I'm not going to go over that. No need to go over that again. If you have any doubt about it, just get that book, Like Father, Like Son, on Clouds of Glory. So here's what Jesus said, as I document in the book. But 99.9% of all biblical commentators say, well, no, he did promise to come back in a physical body. Boy, I've been involved in some Facebook discussions over this last week and a half of one person after another arguing that he must come back in a physical body at the so-called end of time. So that's misguided. And that's one aspect of our investigation of the challenge of Christ. But having investigated that for a good bit, I then turned our attention to the question, and it's a correlative subject. And that is the subject of the dispensational view of eschatology. And here's what I mean. On the one hand, the atheist tells us Jesus said he was coming back in the first century in judgment at the end of the age. He clearly did not do it, therefore he cannot be the Son of God. Our dispensational friends, and let me reiterate this, ladies and gentlemen, look, I have said this many, many times. I mean it sincerely. I am not impugning the honesty or the integrity or the sincerity of the love of dispensational people for the Lord. I am not. But they are adherents and advocates of a system. Listen carefully, catch the power of this, with no disrespect intended, with all due respect intended. They are espousing a doctrine that says Jesus failed. Now, if you're tuning in for the first time and hearing this for the first time, you may be shocked by that, but consider, in the dispensational paradigm, God looked down through the stream of time. He chose the first century to be just the right time to send his Son to establish the kingdom. That is a given in the dispensational literature. So Jesus came at just the right time. He offered the kingdom to the Jews. The Jews rejected that kingdom, and subsequently and consequently, the Father then withdrew the kingdom offer, postponed the kingdom narrative, the kingdom countdown based upon Daniel chapter 9, 24 to 27, and inserted a gap of so far 2,000 years between the 69th week and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9. So what this means, ladies and gentlemen, is that God sent his Son to do something, and his Son could not do it due to Jewish rebellion. That means Jesus failed. I have examined in depth the argument that says the kingdom offer was contingent, conditional upon Israel's acceptance. And it was not. I'm not going back over that territory because time's already getting away from me here. The point of fact is, there is not one text anywhere in the Bible that says Jesus came to offer the kingdom to Israel if they would accept it. No, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The time has drawn near. Mark 1:15, Matthew chapter 4 and verse 17. All attempts to make the kingdom offer a conditional offer based upon Israel's obedience and acceptance are absolutely false. One final notice here. Luke chapter 10. Jesus sent his apostles out to preach and to say, the kingdom of heaven is drawn near. And he said, if you go into a city and there they do not receive your message, then walk outside the gates of the city, take off your sandals, shake the dust from your feet, and to say, you got to catch this, nevertheless, the kingdom has drawn near, in spite of their rejection, in spite of their rebellion, in spite of Israel's unbelief. God said, nevertheless, doesn't matter, the kingdom is drawn near. No contingency, no postponement, no delay. In spite of your unbelief, in spite of your rejection of the offer, the kingdom is still at hand. It's coming whether you like it or not. It's coming whether you accept it or not. I tell you what, that little word, nevertheless, in Luke chapter 10 and verse 9, is incredibly important. So what I've been doing for you over the last several weeks is to examine the question, is there a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9, 24 to 27? Now remember, our dispensational friends say that the end of the 69th week occurred at the time of the baptism of Jesus. Okay. So the countdown was just proceeding very nicely along. But then they say it was because of the rejection of Jesus that the countdown was postponed. Well, wait a minute. That means that the countdown should have extended into the 70th week. Because if the 69th week ended at the baptism of Jesus, then that means the 70th week should have kicked in immediately. And it wasn't for three and a half years that Jesus was rejected. Therefore, if you're going to argue for a gap anywhere in the text of Daniel chapter 9, you ought to be inserting a gap between the 69 and 1/2 week and the last half of the 70th week. There's not a single dispensationalist that I have ever read that takes that position. They mess up their own mathematical calculations by saying 69th week ended at the baptism of Jesus. Oh, but wait, then it was at the rejection of Jesus that the prophetic countdown was suspended. Well, wait a minute. If the countdown of the 70 weeks was not suspended and postponed until the rejection of Jesus, to reiterate, that means that since his rejection was 3.5 years after his baptism, then that means the suspension, postponement of the countdown should have occurred after the 70th week, or in the midst of the 70th week. Okay, got to go on. So, we've been talking about, is there a gap, is there not a gap? And I have presented for you now some 9 charts. And by the way, I want to make an announcement here. I am absolutely thrilled to announce for you, I have just completed about a 20-part. I don't remember the exact number. I've got to go back and count them. I've just simply done them as I came to the issue. But it's approximately 20. It may be maybe 17 or 18, but it's a goodly number, all right? And forgive me for not knowing the exact number. I've produced them in DVD format, in video format, a special study on the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9. Now, in this very special study, all right, I examine each of the 6 constituent elements of Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks are determined to put away sin, to make the atonement, to finish the transgression, to seal vision and prophecy, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to anoint the most holy. I go into great detail, ladies and gentlemen, in discussing each one of those constituent elements. In addition to that, I discuss the question, was Daniel chapter 9 fulfilled during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes? Scholars such as John Collins in his commentary on the book of Daniel says Daniel 9 is not a messianic prophecy. It was fulfilled in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. So I go into great detail, discussing and proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that simply could not be true. And then, this is where it gets so exciting. I have a 3-video series, special study on, is there a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9? Now, that 3-video study is clearly a condensed version, highly concentrated, highly compacted study of what I presented for you and with you over the last several months. But nonetheless, I've even got one lesson, or part of one lesson, that I have not presented here with you on Now TV. Now, this will be available very, very soon. And by the way, we're going to make it available on flash drive. We're also going to make it available as a download on my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. I don't know of another study quite like what I have just produced. I really don't. Now, volume upon volume upon volume has been written about Daniel 9:24 to 27. But I do not know of another study that breaks it down as I have done, focusing on the issue especially on the question of, is Daniel 9 about Antiochus Epiphanes and his day? And is there a gap between the 69th and the 70th week? Folks, you please be looking for that. I think once you start watching this, you're going to get as excited as I am. This has been a major, major undertaking for me to produce this series on the 70 weeks of Daniel chapter 9. Okay, let me get into chart number 10. Now, this is our final chart. We will be changing directions ever so slightly in next week's video. But for the time being, for today, we're looking at chart number 10 on the question, is there a gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel 9:24 and following, or is there not? I'm going to approach it. And remember, I am utilizing what is known as the modus ponens form of argumentation, which very simply stated is, if this is true, then this must be true. And I cannot go into huge detail as I bring out this modus ponens argumentation or form, but I'm going to present enough that I believe, hopefully at least, will pique your curiosity and make you want to look deeper into this critical issue. Is there a gap between the 69th and the 70th week? And I believe that if you'll look at the evidence, the overwhelming amount of evidence that I have presented so far here on Now TV, and especially in my video series that I just announced, you're going to see that the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. There is no gap of 2,000 years between the 69th and the 70th week. Okay, got to go on. If there is, all right, if there is, as Thomas Ice and virtually all dispensationalists claim, if there is a gap of so far 2,000 years between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9, then listen to me very carefully. And I just realized I'm going to have to extend this at least another week or so. Okay. If there is a gap of so far 2,000 years between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9, then Israel's feast days are not fulfilled. Now, at this point, my dispensational friends will go, absolutely. That's what we teach, Preston. You're now agreeing with dispensationalism. Oh, but wait. As the old saying goes, Houston, we have a problem here. How is that? In Matthew chapter 5, 17 and 18, Jesus said to the Jews who, because of the teaching that he had been doing, they were concerned. Is this man speaking against Torah? And Jesus said, do not think that I have come to destroy the law. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Now, the Greek word that is used there means to bring it to pass, to bring into a reality. For verily I say unto you, Jesus said, until heaven and earth passes away, not one jot, not one tittle shall pass from the law until it is all fulfilled. Now, I have to tell you, when I was a young man being trained as a salesman, one of my customers was an elder in a Seventh-day Adventist church in Pea Ridge, Arkansas. Wonderful man, absolutely wonderful man. I was in the store twice a week. We had an egg business, and I sold him eggs. And he and I would get in discussions about the passing of the law. And I've got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, Matthew 5, 17 and 18 was almost invariably the focus of our discussion. He would say, now, look, Don, I was a young guy, okay. But he would go, look, Don, Jesus said, until heaven and earth passes away, not one jot, not one tittle shall pass from the law until it's all fulfilled. And he would go, look around, Don. Heaven and earth is still here. And I have to tell you, the very first time I heard that argument, I was like, holy cow, he's right. Oh, but wait. As I pondered, Jesus said, until heaven and earth passes away, not one jot or one tittle shall pass from the law until it is all fulfilled. Now, in my current understanding of that, the passing away of, quote, heaven and earth and the fulfillment of all things written in the law and the prophets are concurrent. They occur at the same time. They are synchronous events. Now, again, my Seventh-day Adventist friends, and I do have Seventh-day Adventist friends, by the way, would say, Don, that's our position. Heaven and earth passes away at the time of the fulfillment of all things. Oh, but wait. Then my Adventist friends argue, well, here's what happens. Here's what they tell us. Paul, writing to the Colossians, said, let no man judge you in respect of new moon, feast days, and Sabbaths, which are a shadow of the good things that are about to come. And my Sabbatarian friends say, now you see, Don, what this means is that the ceremonial aspect of the law, with its sacrifices, bloody offerings, Jesus took that away. But he did not take away the Sabbath, of course, which is their main focus. Oh, but wait a minute, ladies and gentlemen. A scholar, a Seventh-day Adventist scholar, by the way, by the name of Baldwin, has written a really excellent book Really excellent book. If you want the name of it, just contact me and I'll give you the name, the source, how you can purchase the book. And by the way, I am currently writing a book entitled Celebrating the Eighth Day, in which I discuss the issue of the Sabbath. I don't know when it's going to be finished. It's kind of gotten out of hand lengthwise, but nonetheless, this scholar by the name of Baldwin takes note of the fact that the very Sabbatarian argument that is offered on Colossians chapter 2, 14 to 16, actually destroys the Sabbatarian position. Here is why. And by the way, I've used this argument for years and years and years before I ever read Baldwin's material, but his material is excellent. It's scholarly and it's excellent. So once again, the Sabbatarians teach us, well, what Colossians is teaching is that the ceremonial aspect of the law was nailed to the cross. We are no longer obligated to offer bloody animal sacrifices. Only the Sabbath remains. But wait a minute. Daniel 9 is built upon the premise of the fulfillment of Israel's festal calendar. It begins with the sacrifice of Jesus as the Passover. After the 69th week, it says after the 62nd week, but all scholars recognize it's technically after the 69th. Messiah will be cut off. Well, that's the Passover. That happened on the Passover. And it ends with Sukkot, and includes, by the way, Rosh Hashanah, the time of judgment, the destruction of the city in an overwhelming flood, and it consummates in the bringing in of everlasting righteousness, which is the fulfillment of Sukkot. Now watch this. Rosh Hashanah is the time of the judgment. Oh my goodness gracious, I just realized what time it is. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen, but I was about to get carried away in regard to the Jewish feast days and the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, the passing away of the feast days, and the gap of Daniel chapter 9. We'll pick it up next week.